How are we doing, Dean? What do you think?
I was going to suggest that that you start. We have,
Okay, great.
we have a forum, and
Well, let's call the meeting to order. The first on agenda. Do we want to do introductions again? Are we good?
well, I might suggest that if anyone is here who didn't have a chance, I know Erin DeVries is here on behalf of Steve. She's not officially a rep, but she does. She came ready to make comments on his behalf. So
Okay.
maybe Erin.
Hi, this is Erin DeVries, and I work for Vermont River Conservancy, and I'm sitting in zero gravity right now because I had to get my car fixed. So I'm going to be on mute and also turn off my video because I'm eating my breakfast this morning. So, but I'm listening intently.
Welcome.
Nice to see you all. Thanks.
Okay. So do we have anything to say about the agenda? Any changes, or what's the acknowledgement of annual meeting? Are we going to?
Well, yeah, thank you for that. And I should have made it, should have given you a heads up. I'm simply drawing attention to the fact that this is the first meeting after the start of the fiscal year, which under the bylaws is called the annual meeting. In any other year, this would be the meeting where there are actions on officers. But since you were elected only in April and the council decided that there wasn't going to be another election only 3 months after the first, we have no such election. But to just get it in people's minds that the July meeting going forward will be the annual meeting. That was all.
Thank you. Do we have any further discussion about the agenda? Any changes? Okay. I hear anything. Do you want to jump to review the minutes from last meeting?
There was one comment provided to us by Lauren. She was present, but was not shown in the minutes as being present. I believe I have that right.
Okay. Can you show them up on the screen, or?
Just a sec here.
Yeah. Sorry, Dean, I don't mean to rush.
No problem at all. No problem at all.
I had a question on page 2 of the minutes. What are RFQs? Do you remember?
RFQs, that an acronym should have probably been spelled out. Requests for qualifications.
I have a question on page 2 as well. Under item 8, Lauren asked about if operating and maintenance costs could be considered for funding. Is there a how old projects could be considered, or is it just anything that's got continuing operating and maintenance costs?
So I can quickly address that. Going forward, projects that are funded using the funds that we will be directing, those projects will be eligible for operating and maintenance costs. So DEC has said that going forward, some of the money that gets distributed will be specifically earmarked for operation and maintenance. There will be some projects that have been built within, I believe it's roughly the last 5 years or maybe 4 years, that could also be essentially pulled into this system and would be eligible for O&M. That's something that was getting a fair bit of discussion at DEC many months ago, and it seemed to have dropped as a priority. It'll probably come back when some of the other things that they've been working on lately are finished and they can return their attention to it. But short answer is there will be some projects, and that would be a decision for the council to make or be involved in. We could go through some exercise where we identify all possible projects and then determine which ones seem like the most sensible ones to bring in.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussions about the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes as written.
Okay,
With the addressing the Laura Weston piece.
Second it.
okay, I hear Richard Goff make a motion, and I think Chad seconded it. Was that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Great. Let's move on, I guess, to the next item on the agenda then.
Oh, we have to
Yeah.
Or
vote.
not? Oh, wait, any abstentions? Sorry. Okay, so all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay.
Peter, I'm not sure if you saw, but Lauren had a hand raised momentarily.
I did not. Lauren, you have discussion?
Sorry, that was me voting.
Oh, okay.
Apologies.
Sorry, I think I still need a little more coffee here. Okay, we'll get there. Okay, I guess now we can move on to the next item.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, there were six members of the council, representatives or alternates who responded to the survey that was put online. If you recall, the director of the Regional Planning Commission has asked different committees or groups that work with the Regional Planning Commission to provide input on the issue of inclusiveness. It's part of the commission's overall work with diversity, equity, and inclusion. There were 6 responses from this council, just for comparison, 7 from the Missisquoi. 2 folks happen to be in both. And I have on the screen I shall just quickly say, in the meeting packets were the responses, all of the responses, not those just specific to this council. But all of the responses received to date were in the meeting packet. What I have on the screen right now and could share are those responses from people who are part of this council. So the first question, how will this statement impact your work? And I apologize for the boxes. There were some copy pasting issues here. But one response, how will this statement impact your work? This fully supports our work. Someone said the statement will remind us to view our language and policy making closely. Someone said ensure that funding for QUIS sponsored projects is distributed equitably and so forth. Someone said positively. So then in response to the question, what could you or the committee do differently? Someone said they weren't sure if there's any room for improvement, things going well. Someone had suggested have an in-person meeting place on public transit, send PowerPoints out before to people who use screen readers, and so forth. I'm not going to try to read every word. To outline an outreach plan for how future QUIS funding and grant opportunities will be advertised. Someone mentioned having attended the Abenaki Voices training and found that pollution of water is a form of an environmental injustice to our Native peoples. Someone commented about electing women to chair, vice chair positions. And then someone had said to have similar language with specific recognition on the indigenous community as well. In response to the question within the committee's topic, what justice, equity, diversity, inclusion goals or objectives should be considered? One respondent wasn't sure. One respondent indicated that the needs of landowners should be considered, their financial ability to address the issue on their own versus with funding assistance. They also mentioned priority neighborhoods. Another respondent indicated that we should ensure that all residents and visitors to the basins have access to clean drinking water and safe water-based recreation. Someone thought that the inclusion statement is a good starting point, but we should also make efforts to recognize past injustices. Someone suggests adding minority involvement in our subgrant contract weighting process. Someone suggested adding language that includes the indigenous community. There was an open-ended question, and one respondent had asked, how can we get other minorities into our communities? That's the sum of the responses to the online survey. This is an opportunity for the group to react to that or add to it, and whatever comes out of this, and there's no specific task, but whatever comes out of it will be shared with the Regional Planning Commission as they begin work on the regional plan. And I'll just turn things back over to you.
Richard?
Yeah, I got a comment and actually came from Megan. As we look at within our committee topics, what could we do to enhance inclusion? And one of the thoughts was, if we identify things as co-benefits, clearly specify in co-benefits inclusion elements that would highlight inclusion as a co-benefit, would be of value to bring this to some actual benefit.
It's an interesting suggestion, yeah. How would we qualify that? Just out of curiosity, like how would that be worded as a co-benefit, like including more subcontractors type of thing? Like if its subcontractor is BIPOC led or something of that nature?
That's a thought. I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
But the whole concept of co-benefits and the value of them is not clear, and to try to make them more clear might be useful, and the inclusion element might be a way to make them more clear.
Sorry, hand raised. I think just making sure to that our meetings and our processes are super transparent and regularly available and being advertised as such. Feels really important to me. I feel like a lot of the work we do happens behind closed doors. And so just trying to make sure that we're just telling everyone what we're doing and why we're doing it that way, so they have the opportunity to provide input if they want to.
If I may, Mr. Chair, in response to Richard's question or comment, there have been some preliminary discussions of co-benefits. There is some material that might help members get their heads around how some of these issues could be incorporated into the co-benefits process. There was I'll call it a research paper prepared by a class of UVM students on this topic. And it drills down, it's several pages long, and it drills down to many different areas, including environmental justice. And it gets at some of the things that we are talking about here. And Richard, if you don't have a copy of that report or a link to it, I will make sure that you get it.
Dean, could you send that to more than just Richard?
Yeah, I believe it had been referenced. I will send it to everybody and just ask Dea to help me remember that link, or I'll send the document itself. It's not large. I think it's about 3 megabytes, but I will do a blast with that in it. And yes, to the comment in the chat, just so that everybody is aware, if you aren't seeing the chats, yes, we will see that all members, including people at Vermont Rivers Conservancy, get that.
So for the Regional Planning Commission, they'll take all these comments and then hopefully put some into action, into, you know.
This exercise follows on the heels of the commission adopting an inclusion statement. And I don't have that up on my screen right here, but I can get it quickly. The Regional Planning Commission is also beginning the update of the regional plan, and by statute the regional plan must be updated. It used to be on a 5-year cycle, now it's on an 8-year cycle. But one of the very first actions that is happening is the development of a series of value statements, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. And those value statements will help guide the process of updating the regional plan. So I think it would be fair to say that one of the things that will happen as a result of all the comments that are coming in from the committees is that they will help shape those value statements, which are going to be broad, I would suspect, but in time, they'll be fleshed out through detailed work on the regional plan. So it's possible that ultimately there would be some section of the regional plan that gets expanded with reference to diversity, equity, inclusion that come about as a result of this. So that's a little bit abstract, but ultimately it could include a recommendation in the regional plan. I just am not predicting what that would be.
But I mean, what I guess I meant was that, you know, one aspect of a presentation of a project, you know, let's say it was represented by the Abenaki or by a group that was severely affected by some kind of pollution within their area, that could translate to a higher score, let's say, you know, in terms of implementation.
Yeah, so yes, that I see gets pulled out of the Regional Planning Commission realm and then into the realm of the Clean Water Service Provider and the council. And yes, it's absolutely clear that as part of the prioritization process, one of the things that gets considered is this area of co-benefits, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later. And part of co-benefits could be environmental justice, which I'm just using as a catch-all phrase to describe the stuff that we're talking about now. And certainly a project that addresses that could get a higher score than one that doesn't. If it's one of the pieces of co-benefits that the council thinks it's important, it would have a score attached to it. If we can leave it at that, I will be coming back to this a little bit later in the presentation, but co-benefits are explicitly part of the prioritization process, and they are explicitly something that the council weighs in on and uses to make judgments about the priority of projects.
Dean, just to follow through with this a little bit. So let's say, because it seems like the priority of all the decision-making has to do with the reduction of phosphorus. But let's say you had two groups, one which, you know, had a project, didn't quite reduce as much phosphorus, but represented a highly impacted population. Is it conceivable then that, you know, the group that had this project didn't quite reduce the amount of phosphorus, but had other elements that were represented in, you know, the prioritization process, could get the project, the monies ahead of the one that reduced the phosphorus more?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, or it's a yes, but, and this is something that we're talking about a lot internally. You know, what would we be proposing to the council? But I would say this way: if the projects are relatively close in terms of the prior phosphorus reduction, but the one with the slightly lower score or somewhat lower score in terms of phosphorus reduction has immense co-benefits, then it's conceivable to me that with the reevaluation or the further discussion of co-benefits, that the council could ultimately switch the rankings. That's how I would respond. If, on the other hand, we're talking about a project, one that has really great phosphorus reduction potential, and one that has middling phosphorus potential, but great co-benefits. That gap between a high phosphorus reduction and a middling one may be too big to gulf with just the discussion of co-benefits. And this is going to be something that will be part of whatever formal presentation that the QUISP makes to the council in terms of the scoring system. That'll be taking it like one step beyond the framework that we will be talking about later.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on that too, Dean. I think that also we have to realize that in context, we're looking at a lot of projects. And so the sum of the parts, right, are important. And so those would be measured against each other as well. So we're not just looking at this project against this project. It's a number of projects and how they all rank and whether or not we're reaching those TMDL goals, right? So the idea of like this or that, to me, it seems simplified, and it's more about all the different projects being compared in a general sort of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a variance, right? So I don't know if I'm making sense here, but you know, the sum of parts greater than the whole.
At this point, I might say, oh, Mr. Chair, Lauren raised her hand.
Sorry, I just wanted to chime in with two quick things. I had a long conversation with Stacy Pomeroy the other day about how clean water might be like a misnomer for some of the work that we're doing. It's really like healthy waters, and just trying to, they're going to provide a training on this at some point from DEC, but it's like healthy natural river systems and lakes versus thinking about like no erosion and no sediment movement. And sorry, there's a large truck going by. And I just wanted to like bring that to the table because I think I've heard clean water so much that even though I know it's like a healthy river goal, in my brain I went to like, we must stop all erosion, even natural processes of erosion, on like river bend edges. And then the other thing I just wanted to echo from the Abenaki training was that they really emphasized like how important it is to get the younger generation involved in this type of work. Sorry, I'm not feeling well. And so just trying to heed that piece of advice in our rating of projects of if there is a benefit. Like we were specifically told to involve the younger generation by the Abenaki community. So we should be thinking, we should be considering that and weighing that heavily in some of our projects, and just the education piece that I know isn't necessarily the point of this clean water money. Like having heard specifically from that community that they think education is important too. Just trying to make sure that stays incorporated and stays at the front of everybody's minds.
Just to, I guess, piggyback on that, you know, a lot of times we've been, I mean, maybe some people have had a different education, but in terms of, you know, thinking of water as only clarity, you know, our river water is clarity, and seeing an open waterway. You know, I've since been on some small pieces of water in the Lamoille Basin, and some of which were, you know, had wood added to it. Some of which the wood actually just fell into, you know, this dead trunks just fell into the water. And so, you know, I think that, you know, that kind of natural process where wood is falling into the water, it's allowed to be in there, you know, it's allowed to be in the way the river system, you know, existed maybe thousands of years ago. So, I mean, I think it's important to think of sort of the ecosystem differently than just clean or clear water.
Yep. So I wanted to make a comment, but I feel like we need to, I guess, continue moving forward due to time constraints. Are we in the public comment sector still here? Or I mean, it's Dean, where are we at here? Is there
Well-
anyone from the public?
Let me check to see if there's anyone who has not been acknowledged already. Well, Tom Joslin is not a council member. He is a member of the Clean Water Advisory Committee in Chittenden County. And I think, and Ethan Swift is here
Yep.
as a stand-in for the basin planner. Everyone else, I think, has been recognized or introduced. So in terms of what is required, I would say that really nothing is required. The people who have responded to the survey have provided a foundation for the group's response. If you want to just leave it at that, that could be fine. If there are other people who after this discussion want, and the minutes will be shared with the Regional Planning Commission, but if there are others who would feel more comfortable just typing in responses, if they haven't done so now, but they would like to type in responses to that online survey, we could propose that as well. But there's no specific action that's required as part of this, is in my understanding.
Okay. Would anyone else like to make comment, or should we move to the bylaws discussion? Is that where we're at?
I had thought we were at prioritization. Sorry,
Wait, am I looking at the wrong?
I'm seeing prioritization as well.
Okay, maybe I have the wrong agenda here. Hold on. June 23rd.
Peter, are you on June 23rd?
Oh, yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
All right. I got the packet and I just was in the wrong one. Boy, I need more coffee. Okay. Prioritization then. Let's move on to that.
So what we're doing in these early months of the council's work is a lot of information sharing, anticipating of more information, anticipation of guidance, and we're doing our best to try to move forward and make some productive use of people's time, share information and get people's reaction to that information. And this whole topic of the prioritization framework is being presented to the council in that vein. It's not conclusive. It's not the last discussion that we will have, but it's intended to have people begin to understand the moving parts and have some basic agreement on what we do with those parts. I've referred to the framework in the past. I am not expecting the council to take a vote on this, although it could. But in my view, the framework that the council, the clean water service provider, and I apologize for using that, but it's in our name, it's in the rule, and so to the extent that that's what we're called in rule and law, I'm going to refer to it. But we are saying that there are that part of this framework is that there are 6 categories that are going to be used in all likelihood for determining an initial scoring and rank of projects. Particularly, we're talking about design projects. So projects that are more than just initial ideas, but things that have been worked on substantially, and they are either going to move into engineering or they're going to move into construction. This is the point where we will probably be looking at significant amounts of money, and we want to apply a somewhat rigorous process. And we would use the 6 categories that are in statute. I'm sorry, that are in rule. My apologies. We've talked in the past about how not all of those things would be given equal weight. We don't know what those weights are yet. We as a QUISP haven't provided them, but we're starting from the position that there will be weights assigned to those. And when you have criteria and you have weights, then you can come up with a total score. And maybe this is what Peter was getting at when he was talking about, looking at things comprehensively. We have a list of projects. They will have a score that's based on these criteria and their weights, and that will give us, and mind you, remember that one of those criteria is co-benefits. So there will be an initial consideration of co-benefits at the very beginning used to come up with this. And that will give us an overall rank. Some numbers will give us rank. As I had said earlier, there's been a lot of discussion of co-benefits within the Regional Planning Commission staff, the Clean Water Service Provider staff. We are still trying to figure out what we think is going to be recommended to the councils. But I'll just say at this moment, we're thinking it could be a two-stage process. So something where a set of projects are applied for. People submit applications, different groups submit applications. They have information about their projects. And with that information, we come up with an initial ranking. And part of the information they give us is the applicant's take on co-benefits. So someone may say, I've got evidence that my project is going to do wonderful things, many different co-benefits, employ Abnaki youth, address some underserved community, and so on. So we're thinking that there would be an initial consideration of co-benefits done, and then there would be a second one performed more intensively by the council. That's just high level, but that's where we are in terms of this framework. And then the last thing I was going to say is part of the framework that we are looking at. This very first bullet that I mentioned was a process for those projects that have been, a fair amount of work has been done on them and they're ready for engineering and or construction. The last bullet in this list, part of the framework, is that we could be looking, or we will be looking at separate rankings for the early stage work. Whether it's much like the first example, I'm not sure. We could be looking at 3. We could be looking at sub-grants to partners so that they can do development work at the very earliest stages. And then we look at something that's in between, and then we look at, but the point is simply that we're not going to be just ranking, we're not going to be comparing a project that is at the very earliest stages with one that's had a lot of work done on it. We will be comparing projects that have had a lot of work done on them with other projects that have work done on them, because that's a fairer competition, I guess is what I'll say. So that's the overview of the framework. I have shared some of these slides before. We've seen pollution reduction, cost effectiveness, durability, operation and maintenance, the conformance of a project with the basin plan, and co-benefits. We've seen these before. These just kind of flesh out what I had said. But I think I'm going to stop talking and then just let people respond to what I have said so far. And I will have some follow-up things to say, because it's been remarked that some of these criteria are interrelated, and that's very true. And I can say a few things about that. And I see Richard's hand up.
So just I think it's a simple question. The CWSP is the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. So will the board of directors be making decisions or approve decisions on which projects will be approved?
No, the Regional Planning Commission's board has no role in this. The staff of the Clean Water Service Provider happens to be people that work at the Regional Planning Commission, but the but the staff doesn't bring material to the Regional Planning Commission board at any point in this process. The staff will be preparing material and initial rankings for the council, and then you make the final determination.
Thank you.
If there weren't follow-up questions, then I can just address this interrelationship issue that had been mentioned before, and pretty simple. It's clear there are some interrelationships. Pollution reduction, the whole notion of cost effectiveness hinges on the amount of pollution reduction and its cost. So I would say that when we talk about pollution reduction, yes, it can exist on its own, but it's also bound up in cost effectiveness. And cost effectiveness also considers time, so its durability comes into play. So the areas or the topics that are identified in rule as the empirical factors, some of them are interrelated. And I would say the same thing for operations and maintenance. Operation and maintenance by itself is a factor, but it's tied into durability and cost effectiveness also. I'm mentioning it because there was someone who observed that these things are somewhat related, and the answer is yes, they are. I think it will go to the question of weights, or may go to the question of weights, but there's nothing that is established that says that these variables can't be somewhat related, and we have to, I guess, accept them as they are, because they are the empirical factors. But I'd be interested to know if there are people that, you know, want to express some concern about that. The only other thing I wanted to just touch on, and I can come back to this, is there was some mention at the last meeting about including project viability in this framework, and I can talk about that a little bit, or we'll talk about that. And then also the impact on cultural and socioeconomic populations. That's somewhat related to the conversation that we were just having, and I can talk about that more.
Hey, Dean, I have two questions for you. The first is like a little off topic here, but I just want to confirm the Lamoille Basin has funding for forestry practices, right? But the other two, or the other two ones I care about, Missisquoi and North Lake Direct, don't. Is that right?
Well, that's not consistent with my understanding, in that
Okay.
what we've been told is there were slices of the pie in different areas or sectors used to calculate the total. But once we have the total, we are not bound to distribute according to those sectors. We have a total. We can use those sector pieces as a guide, or we can not use them as a guide. So we have a total amount of funding available in Lamoille for eligible projects, is how I understand it.
And
Dean, does that have to do with, there was the chart at the end that you sent us, and it looked like there were a lot of basins that did not have forestry listed in terms of, I'm assuming they didn't have enough pollution in those areas to constitute any remediation. So I wasn't clear about that.
Yeah, and if I may, we can talk about this a little bit more, but it really goes to the modeling work that's been done, and how bad is the problem within that sector, and is the problem so bad that it is more than could be reasonably addressed by the regulatory components of Act 76 or other regulations. So basically, in those places where there isn't funding for forestry, it would be because non-regulatory intervention isn't seen as necessary. The problem isn't so big that we have to put all hands on deck. The hands on deck are regulations, and that's expected to be enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then my second comment is all of the different criteria, I feel like just add complications to this conversation. And like when really we're looking for that phosphorus reduction number, obviously we're looking at cost, and we want everything to be quantified, but with the acknowledgement that so many things are interrelated and flexible and prices vary and you have no idea how to anticipate inflation right now, it feels almost, my argument would be, let's reduce some of those criteria and let's just have like phosphorus reduction and like cost effectiveness for the initial project, knowing that like O&M and durability and all these things, like you can't really know at the time based on so many unknown factors. And it feels like we're adding complications to it that maybe don't need to be there. And I don't know if we have any flexibility to change this or make those weights 0. But that's just, it feels like this is a simpler issue of like, we need to bring projects that reduce phosphorus and have co-benefits. And that's where I'm at these days, of just like, that's it, if it's a good project, we should fund it, in my opinion.
Hey, Lauren, I'll make a comment on that. I think that the equations, the way they're set up, I think they're supposed to make it easier for us. So if we have all the aspects, that equation should, boom, punch out a number. And then based on what you're saying, I think we should really think about the question of feasibility in general. So say you have 2 programs or 2 projects that are both equally weighed or close to being equally weighed. And, with all the co-benefits added into it, et cetera, but one has a community base that's already ready to go. And it's really that feasibility element and their maintenance element is intact. That would be a weight maybe that's not really pointed out in that equation, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like the reality of the situation is it comes back always to, is it feasible within that time in that moment with that community that's working on that project? Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, but then my argument back would be, I have no idea if maintenance is going to be actually done unless I hold that and I put in all the, sorry,
right.
There's another truck going by. Unless I know what that maintenance cost is going to be, like let's say it breaks, or let's say all of my trees die, which just happens sometimes. You can't predict those future costs. I think community buy-in and viability, those make complete sense. But like trying to predict these future things and like weigh them seems like an exercise in futility to me.
Which brings us back to maintenance. Like I still want to get some clarity on that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to ask another question based on that. Our projects that have, and I know we brought this up before, but I can't remember the exact answer if there was any, projects that are already in existence, but are in dire need of maintenance. And it would actually, if they were maintained, would create, would be beneficial and cost effective. Is that on the table, or is this all new implementation, new design, as far as funding goes? I can't remember the answer to that, Dean.
Yeah, and the short answer is yes. Some projects in the last some odd years would be eligible to be pulled in and essentially put on the council's ledger to count towards. And that's a conversation that I would imagine will be had sometime during the first year. I also just want to quickly say, I agree with the concerns about O&M, and I do think it could be a relatively simple solution to give a very low weighting to O&M so that we could say, yeah, it's part of the consideration, but until we have better data or have some better understanding of how things are going to work, it just contributes a very negligible amount to the overall score. Yeah, we've talked about that. And I see Ken's hands up. I don't know if you could see that.
Yeah, I just like to say this is a really important discussion. It's good to get this laid out, but I would hate to see this discussion serve as a bottleneck to actually getting the money out and getting the projects out. I think we're going to learn a lot in the next year or two about how we're going to apply, these concepts, these 6 areas. I mean, I can dig into these and ask about, are we talking about free phosphate? Are we talking about bound phosphate? Are we talking about proximity to the lake, to the most affected areas of the lake? There are all kinds of levels that we can go to in dissecting this out. And I think we will during our discussions when we finally get to projects and start talking about projects. And I'm assuming that the first few years of this is going to be a learning process. And we don't even know what projects we're looking at yet and adjusting to yet. So I'm happy to talk about this and to work it through, but I really think that we need to get moving. And I'd hate to have this hold us up at this stage of the game, because I think we're going to figure this out as we go. I have a lot of trust in the people sitting on this council that we're going to figure this out.
Here. I'll just say too, like, who is making the numbers for durability for lifetime of a project? Like, is it the person bringing the project to the table? Because like, I can make up a number, but I don't know. And so just thinking through like the effort that it's going to take to provide numbers, even if the weights are really low, but to provide whatever the other side of that equation is, could be a lot of effort and could also be like quite made up in the end, unless we're having, unless we create a set of standards, like a tree planting project is 10 years, a stormwater project is 50 years if maintained, which they don't get maintained. So just thinking like who's making the second side of the weight.
If I may, Peter, this is a good time to mention that a lot of these numbers are going to be provided to the councils and the clean water service providers by DEC. So DEC has working numbers, but they are not, I don't think they're close to prime time, on the expected life of a project. And so those numbers will be the numbers that we use initially. Similarly, in response to Ken's comments, and he and I were talking about this earlier, the DEC has the expectation that the amount of phosphorus reduction that a project will provide is based on DEC's methodology. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But DEC has methodologies. We may not like them. We may not think that they're the right methodologies, but they are the methodologies that we would be expected to use. So crunch numbers with their methodologies. In time, you will use as inputs their estimates for life. And I totally get that a project that is not maintained will not do its thing for its expected life.
So then I've got a follow-up of, if the numbers being provided to us, is the point of the BWQ just to adjust the co-benefit number? Like, if it's a formula, why? No, like, big picture here, like, what is our actual role?
I think I'm going to go back to, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump right in. It's for the co-benefits. I think it's also, again, they give us the numbers, but we have the boots on the ground and we can see where the community buy-in is going to be the best, and where, that's the project that's, has the most likelihood of success for maintenance. Even if it has that much buy-in, I think that would be a very important score from our perspective. Don't you think? You're muted.
I said, I don't know. Like, it feels important to me, but it's also like, I don't know.
Fair enough.
I had said that I was going to just touch on project viability and impact on cultural and socioeconomic populations. That was a pair of comments people had made or someone had made in connection with this topic previously. And as far as project viability is concerned, I understand it's important. What I wanted to do is to get everybody on the same page concerning what is already a part of the DEC process and what I expect will continue to be an important part of the DEC process. Project viability, and this material, some of it at least, was included in your packet. There's a screening stage in the project evolution process. And first step is to make sure that the type of project is one of those that's eligible for the type of funding that we have. Another step is to get it in the project database. Now, historically, projects wouldn't be added to the database until the basin planner put them there. But going forward, that will not be a requirement as far as I know, that others will be able to put projects in the database. But irrespective of that, there will be an opportunity for the basin planner and for other DEC staff to say what they have to say about a project. So that's part of the screening process. And if it's a shoreland project, it gets reviewed by DEC shoreland people. So there is an assessment of the project and its viability by DEC staff, has been, and as I understand it, will be going forward. Another step in the process has to do with permitting. And I think all of us understand that whether or not a project has a clear and open path to its permitting makes all of the difference in terms of the possible success of that project. Those are things that are already in place, will continue to be in place. I understand that this is not the same as an organization's support for the project or having a very cooperative landowner, but those are things that are really critical to having a project make its way through this screening process. So that was all that I wanted to say about screening. The thing I was going to say about the and socioeconomic populations and the impact on that is that I do think that's really wrapped up in the co-benefits discussion that we were having earlier, so that however co-benefits are addressed, that can be considered there unless there's a belief or feeling that one particular aspect of co-benefits is so important then that it should be on its own as an additional criterion. And that, I would be very interested in hearing that the challenge with that, of course, would be that if you do it for one, it may become very difficult to limit it to one. And so anyway, that's just something to think about.
On that page, on the project eligibility, down at the bottom, there was a footnote about projects on 3 acres of land. So I was unclear about that. And it said that they were not eligible for design and implementation block grants. Does that mean that the project has to be on less than 3 acres? I just didn't understand it.
Yes, if I may, there is a regulatory system that DEC administers that is directed at the so-called 3-acre properties, where 3 acres of impervious surface are regulated. So if a property has 3 acres of impervious surface, it is part of a regulated environment and thus is not part of the world that we're acting in. Now, I will just use a quick example to say, hey, there's sometimes a little bit of weirdness in this. There is a forested parcel in the Missisquoi Basin that I had understood was on the 3-acre list simply because of the protocol, the process that was used to do the initial identification. There were so many logging roads on this property that it was thought to be a 3-acre property and regulated. I think in the end that it was taken out of that. So we could be looking at a project using these funds for it. But you know, even we have to keep our eyes open to make sure that there isn't something that's identified as a 3-acre project and regulated. We have to make sure that it is truly qualified for regulation. Because if it's not, then it would be eligible for the money that we're doling out.
Okay, thank you.
Dick?
Yeah, I was again on the same page, the table 1, step 1. I was trying to follow some of the CWIP funding policy things like page 34 to 41. You know, it got pretty complicated, but you know, I came to the point where it was like, isn't everything available to be funded somewhere else? As I read this, it was like, if you can fund this with something else, you should do it. And this should, the monies that we're talking about here should not be used if there's any other funding available to do it. So it's like, how are we going to find projects that really fall into this new category?
If I may, Mr. Chair, this is something I would say is under active discussion because there is currently a proposal that is a very rough form at DEC. There's a grant program called Enhancements, and there's some work being done about whether or not all projects should come into this process first before it's decided if it goes through this process or enhancements. So the short answer, Richard, is that it's an area of active discussion. The CWIP policy, something that's important to understand is that the CWIP policy predates this process. And it's been updated, or we were told that I've been told, it's been a while since anybody has said, oh yeah, there will be a new QUISP specific policy. So until then, we are using the CWIP policy. But I understand in time there will be something that is QUISP specific, but it's not a perfect fit. And short answer is that it's an area of active discussion, and whether or not all projects come to the clean water service providers, and then we decide everything that could be processed through this process is taken through it, and only the ones that don't move on to another process. It's still active discussion is what I'll say.
Thank you.
Dean, I have a question for you. In general, what is your timeline, do you think, for us to kind of finalize this and agree upon it?
Well,
any idea?
So what I'm looking for is to make sure that there isn't some nail that's sticking up that has to be hammered down. The DEC is still working on guidance materials, but I want people in this group to have some common understanding, or if they don't share a belief in something, then we know where they stand and we know where work may need to be done. One of the next things we talk about is the possible scheduling for this. Originally, we thought contracts for this money would be signed sometime in the middle of this month. We haven't even seen those contracts. It's going to be a while before we have access to the funds, and we don't even know the terms under which DEC will say we can release them. So to Kent's point about getting money out the door, I know that the CCRPC staff working on Lake Champlain, they're hopeful that they can start doling out money in September. I don't think that will happen. I just don't think it will happen that fast. So I suspect that we could be looking, some months after September, but I'll talk more about schedule in a moment.
Okay, sorry, I just jumping ahead again. Dick, was that your hand up again, or are you just?
Sorry, no, I didn't take it down.
Okay.
So what I was going to do is we've talked about viability, eligibility, and anything else people would want to talk about before some freewheeling discussion on the possible funding schedule? And if not, then like I said a moment ago, the legislature appropriated the funds back, when they passed the budget. So we're talking months and months ago. We had been given the impression that middle of July, it wouldn't be July 4th, but sometime in July, the QUIS would have the grant proposals that would give us an understanding of, well, what are the terms that will be going along with this formula funding that we as QUIS are responsible for. We're operating under agreements that run to September. This is so-called phase 3. This is getting into the weeds, but my point is that it's been floated that phase 3 be extended through December. And I worry a little bit that that's because there's this fear that the formula grants might not be in place by September. And so we don't want to be left in a lurch without coverage. So we could be looking at mid-August if we're optimistic. We could be looking at later than that if we're not so optimistic. High level stuff, I realize. I just also wanted to say that, as this relates to operations and maintenance, this first year, it's going to be handled separately. At least that's my understanding. There would be a separate pool of money coming to the QUISPs, to the basins, to the regions for operations and maintenance, but we won't really have much to spend it on. And we won't even know how much the funding requires. So I think that the early stage work on O&M will be people learning the system and something to grasp about operations and maintenance. It's not just that we get the money or that the project sponsor or owner gets the money to maintain it. Along with that comes inspection requirements and verification requirements. So the O&M process is a whole process unto itself, and there will be ramping up associated with that. There will need to be an understanding on the part of those who get the money how the process should work, and we, as the QUISP, will have to figure out how much can we, rely on the project partner to do inspections, but then separate from inspections are verifiers. So it's going to be complicated. And also in the future, it may be that all of the money comes together in one pot, which will just mean we will have to figure out how much should be set aside for O&M. So the formula grant agreements process is kind of complicated. One thing I wanted to just run through was this slide where we expect that the funds will come to the basins quarterly. Now, there are implications to that. It could be in equal pieces. Could be July, October, January, April, but that doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of construction, right? So one of the things I think DEC would consider is that the amounts would be unequal and somehow larger amounts to coincide with work. So maybe we would look at something, and I just, throwing out numbers, it could be 30, 30, 10, 30 if we look at July, October, January, April. But it's an issue that I would be very happy to hear whatever input that the council has to give at this point. But it's something that is just among these things that has to be worked out before all of the contracts are taken care of. It may be less important in this first year than it will be in future years as we have projects coming to a head and needing to, pay for contractors and such. The good news is the money doesn't go away if it's not spent. So the fact that money can carry over could make the specific split less important. And I see Peter's hand up, so maybe I'll just stop and
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment based on personal experience as a district manager and overseeing grants that are like especially large construction. Um, you know, in the last few years, it's been a waiting game money wise. You have all this work and yet, you're scraping by in your budget. And I like the idea that maybe an equal spread of money throughout the process of a project, because then you're not left cash poor during critical moments, and you're trying to like just stay on top of things, and you have an invoice to pay, and you don't have to wait 2 months to pay it to the contractor for whatever it is, engineering, design, or whatever. But I just seem to the current paradigm is really difficult to work under. So I'm hoping that the new paradigm will have sort of this sort of continual cash input to projects so that it protects the integrity of the organizations that's trying to do the work. Yeah.
And I just want to interject before Lauren's has her hand up if I can. These numbers are not the numbers that would apply to the partners. These numbers would apply to the councils so that they don't have to relegate the partners and meter it out and say, you got to figure out a way to stay solvent for the next quarter. No. This is about the QUISPs having the money in the bank so that if Lamoille Natural Resource Conservation District submits a big bill when you submit the bill, that we can pay it. We're not looking at metering your funding out. The project would be given the funding up ahead, and we would want to make sure the funding is there so that the bill can be paid when you submit the invoice. Now, DEC has said things like, if there's no money, if it was done quarterly, let's say, and there was a run on that funding, and then the last partner in line submitted an invoice, DEC has said, well, there's always a process to get a special, allocation from DEC for that contract, but that's time. And we don't want that to be necessary. We want the QUISPs to have the money so that during the busy season, all of the partners can get their bills paid as they submit them.
So voicing for you. So vice versa, but yeah, the same concept. Yes, thank you, Dean. Go ahead.
So I had a question before you said that, which is important. Just in terms of like when we're able to submit projects, are we thinking that would we also be submitting projects or reviewing projects quarterly, or are we reviewing projects annually? I'm just thinking specifically for project development funds. It's not really helpful to have one round a year of project development funds when projects come up when a landowner emails you. And then you need funds to go and chase that project, or unassigned looser project development funds would be great too. And
you're anticipating some of the next slides.
Great, love that. I got questions.
Making you work, Dean.
Sorry?
We're making you work. Sorry.
No. But yeah, these are the things that we are thinking about that I want the council members, to be having this discussion, because it's going to be really important. We have kind of a preliminary sense, but I don't think we should just all be sitting and waiting until we see DEC guidance. I think that the councils and the QUISP are in a position to, clarify what their own thinking is so that we can shape those. But so my slide has the line, schedule for implementation work should acknowledge or reflect the construction season. All of this stuff is stuff that we just want to take that into account. And so if we are imagining that a lot of dollars would be spent in connection with projects that are going to be done, we want to work back from the start of the construction season. We want to have the money and the prioritization taken care of so that, say, the partner can go out for bidding as early as possible, say February. So if we are looking at that, then we have to work backwards So if, you know, if ideally the partners are lining up their contractors as the contractors to themselves are lining up their summer work, then we would need to have the procurement, the contracting work done, say in January. We would need to have the council's prioritization done, you know, before that, say in December. We need to have the applications in hand and processed before that. So all that is just leading to this, you know, possible discussion that for at least some projects, we might be looking at an application deadline in October or November, with the idea that, okay, if we do that, we can have prioritization in December, contracting can follow, and then people can start looking at bidding in February, or however we want to adjust it, but just we are understanding the need to do that. So big picture, stepping back, if things fall into place, then maybe people will tell me, no, that's too late, or that's just too much too soon. But I still feel relatively okay that we could, if the money fell into place, be looking at an application process that we promote heavily in September and get applications in October and still make things work meaningfully in the first year. So that's just one slide. So that's with an implementation project, something that has been pretty defined and developed. For project identification and development, this goes to Lauren's point. Should it happen more than once a year? That's a really good question. And it very well could happen more than once a year. But if it were to happen once a year, I will just say as follows, that those types of projects are going to be less sensitive to the construction season. And so we could be looking at something more along the lines of late July, early August, if we just work through this slide. But it doesn't mean that we couldn't think of something more frequent. I just wanted everybody to understand that we are thinking about these things, and I want to get people's reactions to them. If there was this belief that we should do them at least twice a year, I want to hear that. I know that some consideration is being done to having them on a rolling basis. I have a little bit of hesitation just because administratively that could be a bit more of a hassle. And we have to think about that in all of this as well. Anyway.
Lauren?
So I would say for project ID and product development work, that can be a one-time a year thing if you don't need the landowner or the project information in advance. So if I have $10,000 to go develop projects all year, and I'll tell you what I did at the end of it, I can do that once a year. I don't know if that's going to fly. If that doesn't fly, I would say it needs to happen at least twice a year, because waiting for funding to do product development, if someone emails me in June and I can't fund that until May of next year, is just, landowners aren't going to want to work with me. And then my other piece on the implementation, just thinking about how Decembers usually unfold. Trying to get a quorum to do the prioritization in December makes me nervous, just in terms of vacations and people take off for holidays. So if we could bump that up or do that like first thing January, just thinking about trying to get a quorum and trying to get everybody's opinions in December makes me nervous.
I had some questions that are also related to this, that include how much of the annual formula funds should be offered in a given cycle. So things to be worked out would be that if we do more than one offering a year, you know, should the plan be that we divide it by some percentage? I think that would be great to hear people's thoughts on that at some point. And then we also have the question of how much what should the split be between project ID and development and other types of projects. And there is a 7% number that DEC has used in those tables that some of you have seen, 3%, 4%. I have heard someone suggest that the 7% may not be a cap. So maybe the number could be larger. And then in the early years, that may be a valuable thing. But one of the things that I'm interested in council members giving some feedback on is what should that breakdown be? And then there's going to be this whole question of if all of the O&M money comes in one pool, what will the process be for setting aside money for O&M on projects going forward? Those are just some questions to stimulate people's thinking. I'm not expecting people to respond to them, but we want to get them out there so people know that they will warrant some discussion.
Well, what is a given cycle? I mean, what does that mean?
Well, I think of that, or I mean an offering. So if the QISPs are required to solicit projects at a point in time to collect applications that will be prioritized and ultimately prioritized and funded by the council. So that's what I'm referring to. It could be that we get into semantics because it could be that there are two types of projects and they're both handled, but it's the act of receiving the applications, prioritizing them and getting them ranked and funded, or the money doled out, is that I'm calling a cycle. And will that happen twice a year? Will that happen 3 times a year?
I mean, do you have any idea of how many? I mean, I guess there's no way of knowing how many applications you're going to get at any given cycle.
Right, and we will no doubt have to just kind of feel our way along in the first time of doing this, but it's just something that in time will become something more important for us to think about. But in the first go round, I don't think we will have to do anything along these. We will have the total amount of money in the bank, and we're not going to limit that in any way. But at some point in the future, the council may say, hey, we need to think about giving, you don't not want to be unfair, and maybe that's not the right word, to someone who just happens to have a project that wasn't ready in time. And so that if there's another opportunity to apply that's 3 months later rather than 12 months later, that's good for this whole process.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in a sense you answered your own question that having a shorter cycle and more of them would be better. And I think it would also be better because it would limit the amount of applications that we go through, which I think, realistically, it would be good to give each one as much time as possible so that we're not, overwhelmed with them. So I think more cycles, less applications is a better model.
Dean, I wanted to ask you about the operation and maintenance funding applications. They're separate, I assume, right? They're their own thing, correct?
So normally I would say a project will be funded by this effort. It'll be implemented, and it will, as part of its implementation, there will be the documentation that says, hey, the property owner grants the project sponsor the right to maintain it. So that's taken care of. Mm-hmm. And we also have some assurance that whoever's doing the maintenance will be able to get to the site. So a new project that is built using QISP funds will be in the system, and it will then, like I said, it'll have a finger or a hold on some of that money. Now, the projects that have already been completed, that's going to be a separate discussion that the council will have, at least have the opportunity to have, to say it's worth picking up this project or it's not worth picking. And I'm not sure, I don't want to prejudge, but there may be some project that has, it's been done, it's got a theoretical phosphorus reduction, but we may not have the solid documentation of the landowners giving the sponsor the permission to maintain it. And that might be just a holdup, and it may be the reason why we would not rank that project as high as 2 other projects. And the conclusion of the council may be, well, let's do those 2, but not this 3rd one. And so those 2 would be pulled into the system. And when they're pulled into the system, then going forward, they too would have their hand on some of the O&M money.
Okay, no, yeah, I get that, Dean. I guess what it might have answered my second part of the question, which was when submitting for funding for operations and maintenance after all is said and done, it would be a one project by project basis. It wouldn't be like I have a group of projects I would like to put into a bundle, you know, that need to be maintained, or is it just one by one, that the funding aspect?
I think that question is one that could go in a couple of directions, because if there are, I like the idea of there being efficiencies, so that if there was a way to group projects together, either on, you know, who's the responsible party or who's the verifier, inspect, you know, I'm not going to say that it wouldn't be possible, or it's definitely worth exploring.
The reason I ask is just because, say there's a number of projects that are within the same sort of geographic area, say around a lake, and you have a subcontractor that you want to use to do some maintenance on those that are very similar type of projects. So that's why I was thinking, why not bundle it, and for efficiency's sake? And yeah, that's kind of you're answering my question in a way.
The thing is that all of those projects would have to have been, it had to have been decided by the council that those are
Yes.
ones that we would pull in.
Of course, with that taken for granted. Yeah. Thank you.
So maybe now is a good time to just talk a little bit about application process, insofar as we can, you know, start to prognosticate about it. There was some material in the application, in the meeting packet. We want, well, earlier I was saying how there will be 2 categories at least: projects that have had a fair amount of work done and they're ready for engineering design and or implementation. And then there's the earlier stage stuff, project identification and development. It seems quite likely that we will have a couple of paths. This graphic is just one that's based on, shows the swings of the, I've got this diamond for project screening. That is something that DEC will do, has done, expected to continue to do. And that's something that I'm imagining will, you know, affect the design implementation projects much more so if entirely or exclusively compared to the ID and development projects. But there will be ID projects, development projects, early stage stuff, and those will result in an application. So the green box goes into the blue box, which is where projects go if people want them to be funded. So there's an initial ranking that the QISP does. And then when that initial ranking is performed, it goes to the council. And then the council evaluates the ranking, adjusts it, whatever, finalizes it. And we will then know, since we know how much money we have, which ones are selected. And that results in us being able to say to the applicant, hey, good, you know, we're happy to inform you that that the council has selected your project, and here are the steps that we're going to go through to get your contracts in place, and so forth. And that will mean that the project is off and running. The thing I wanted to say is that this is just a small part of a much larger process. You know, there could be this idea that when the council, if it says, hey, this project doesn't score very high, it's conceivable that the council could say, yeah, we don't think it's quite ready yet, and maybe you need to do more work, but I don't think that that's really likely to be the case. But we wanted to just share that that this is a piece of a smaller, this is a small piece of within a larger process that is fairly established, and that we may be looking at adjusting it, and there will be these two primary sources: the early stage projects and the projects ready for engineering and design and construction. One of the things that we wanted to say about the application process is that it really needs to reflect prioritization. There's really, at least my position right now, is that we don't want to ask an applicant for any information that isn't crucial to determining the rank of the project, because we don't want to make people do any work that they don't need to do. So we want it to be something where they can plug in the numbers they need to plug in, give us their contact information, it's basic stuff, and then that can be used to do the initial prioritization, and that is what will go to the council. Now we would have the applications, and when a project gets to the council, that's where there can be a more extensive discussion amongst the project sponsor and everybody else. But the thinking and the message is that we want the application process to be simple and based on whatever is decided with prioritization. So we won't really know what the applications will require in the end until there is agreement on how they're going to be prioritized. Does that make sense? We also have to understand that as part of this process, we are collecting information for DEC that supports these phosphorus calculations. So we are going to be required to collect data that is useful for that. And a big part of the prioritization process, I think, is going to be the commitment of property owners to allow construction and operations and maintenance. This is something that, O&M is covered, but it has to be clear that the property owner is fully on board. There's a lot of work DEC is doing on the actual document. What does that landowner document look like? Some of you have worked with the one that DEC has used in the past. They're tweaking that. In the cases of a very small subset of projects, it could be a more complicated document, or even an easement in some cases. What we're talking about more specifically is that for an early stage project, we just need to know the type, how big it is, how long do people think it will last, and that maybe that it's just a default to whatever these numbers DEC provides. We will want to know what some approximate P reduction, what some approximate costs, and we want the applicants to say what they think the co-benefits are. Ideally, that would be the sum total of a very simple application process. With project design and implementation, it's going to be some of the same information, but updated or refined. And as I said, it's going to include the property owner commitment, because that's going to be essential to its viability. And it's also going to be the place where the environmental and screening confirmation takes place. I know that at least one of you has expressed some concern about, when in the application process would it be necessary to have all of that screening documentation done? And I think that that's something we will need to figure out. We don't want to spend time evaluating projects and ranking projects that end up not having, not passing through the screening. So at least initially, I'm going to be suggesting that this environmental and other screening happen as part of the application. But I understand that there could be some desire to put it off, perhaps have someone submit an application and submit the screening before a contract is signed. Maybe that will work, but that could also result in a situation where the council obligates funds. We don't have that information and there's a delay in signing the contract. I'm going to take a breather there and just answer questions because I also want to make sure that we have time for Kent to talk about the project that he is going to share with the group in a minute or two.
I'll say something because I always do anyway. It feels to me like I'm a little unclear as to if DEC still has to review and screen our projects, give us the numbers for those calculators. It feels a little unclear to me what the role of the BWQ is. And that might just be my own kind of misunderstanding. I know Peter mentioned the whole community buy-in piece, but if that's it, I'm a little confused.
Can I just make a comment before? Yeah, I didn't mean that's the only thing, Lauren. I just thought that was a linchpin of sort of a deciding factors. But I'll let Dean say more, but I think we decide everything after permitting and all that. We decide the ranking on things.
So as far as phosphorus tracking, those numbers are going to be provided by an applicant using the tools DEC has created. So many of you have some familiarity with the STP calculator that's online. It doesn't cover all project types, but is used for many project types and produces a coarse estimate of the phosphorus reduction that a project can provide. DEC have been doing a lot of work in other areas or related areas with the functioning floodplain initiative, where other types of projects, floodplain restoration and so on, there will be a method for determining the phosphorus credit. So the applicant will plug in the numbers and use the results from the DEC approach as part of an application. So if at this point, I don't think if an applicant thought they had a better estimate of the number, I don't think that they're free to use it. I think that for now, the expectation is that all the applications will have P estimates that come from the DEC model. So that's the first thing. And it will be the applicant that crunches those numbers. As the QUISP, I don't want to be plugging in the numbers. I'll look at the numbers that the applicant plugs in or the results of those and maybe verify them to make sure that there wasn't some mistake. But it will be the applicant using those. So if you've used the STP calculator before, you'll be using it more in the future, and you will also be using a new and enhanced version, but the new and enhanced version is not ready yet. So there's also a interim Excel-based version, which I'll share shortly, that this is a screenshot of different pieces, but has more project types, and it does the same thing. You plug in parameters about the project and it produces the P reduction. So this is an area, like I was saying earlier, where DEC says, here's the tool, use the tool. And I know that may not sound like a very interesting thing for the council to be looking at, but that's going to be part of the information package that goes along with an application. It'll be an important part.
Okay, so that's what the applicant's doing, which, like, in theory will be applicants, the majority of us. But then that creates a quantitative number. The formula, like, sure, we have some role in applying the weights, that would create a quantitative number. And we'll discuss projects. I'm still a little confused. Like, it sounds like the ranking is pretty quantitative. So once we have our formulas, I guess I'm just not sure how this is gonna, like, why this is how this is actually a distributed funding model. That's not what I'm going for, like a regional as opposed to just up at the state. I'm just not sure how this, sorry, apparently my brain is just completely fogged over. So I'm gonna stop now, and that might be my own fault that I'm not understanding at this point in time.
What you sound like you're asking is, what is the role of us? Like if there's such a high quantitative value that DEC's plugging in, then what are we here for?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Dan.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So Dan Albrecht, Chittenden County Regional Planning, and I managed Basin 5, the Northern Lake Champlain one. So Dean's counterpart for this. We had our meeting yesterday, and we struggled with some of the same issues. And one of the things that a member pointed out to me after the meeting, which I realize is reflected in the statute and in the rule. One of the first things it says that a Basin Water Quality Council does is it prioritizes areas of impairment. I'm gonna maybe getting the exact language wrong, but there's a clear sense that it's not just about prioritization of projects. It's sort of like, look at your basin implementation table. What are the priority areas noted in your basin plan? And then go from there. So there might be some great projects that have good phosphorus reduction benefits, but if they're not really in a hot spot, they're less important than a project that is in a hot spot. And I think that was a good reminder to me to go back to that, engage my council with, okay, what are the hotspot areas, and then go from there. So that's a major role of the council. That's number one goal of the council. And it says it like the first duties of a council in the rule. To your point, Lauren and Jed, yes, it's very numeric driven. The goal is phosphorus reduction in an efficient manner, cost per pound of phosphorus removed. And then the council gets back into it in terms of, you can't change the cost per pound and the phosphorus reduction calculation, because that's the driver and should be not subject to people voting on things. But then you do get to tweak the co-benefit score, which might push a project into, if it's on the borderline or in competition with another project to get funded. So that's what I think the council's for, is diving in initially into, okay, where are the hot spots, and then go from there.
Thank you.
That's my thoughts, but that's
right.
just how we're dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
But aren't the hotspots pretty clearly spelled out in the basin plan too from DEC?
Yes, they are, and I think that's the best way to do that, is to go to, like Basin 5, we have a small number of projects, but it's still, the data download from the state was still like 350. But now I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's just winnow that down immediately by only looking at hotspots. So go to the hotspots first, target your projects at the hotspots. At least that makes it a good, and that's a good thing for the council to do, and that is the job of the council.
Yeah, and I want to thank Dan for bringing up that point, because it isn't something that I have dwelled on. Certainly am aware of it. And I would just say that what it is part of is this idea that the council can help coach the partner organizations to work in particular areas that are in the greatest need, which I know is something that those groups are already doing, but the council can coach them further to develop projects in those areas. I am mindful of time. I want to make sure that Ken doesn't get short shrift, but I also see his hand up.
Okay, yeah, and see, Lauren, I really want to support the work that especially your group has done for all the water monitoring that's been going on in the area. And it's time to drill down on those areas. And that's really kind of what got my attention, that somehow this needs to be included in what we're doing, which I think we will do when we're sitting down and looking at the projects. And the other part is I have to keep going back to the tactical basin plan. I think that if somebody brought in a project that did not receive a project tracker number. You know, if somebody actually went to that extent and it was rejected, I would not think that project would get very far with the council's, you know, evaluation. So that's kind of how, that's how I'm interpreting this. And those are some of the things I'd be looking at.
One last thing I would say before maybe things get turned back over to Kent is that I do, and I've mentioned it earlier, that the QUISP will be making some kind of presentation or proposal to the council having to do with the prioritization system. And that would include what those weights are amongst the criteria, which I think is going to be very important. And the council will have a role shaping those weights. Is it now time to share the slides for Kent's presentation on the Deer Brook Gully project?
I would say so. We've got 20, a little less than 20 minutes left here.
Okay, Peter, keep a close eye on me. I have not rehearsed this. So normally when I do this sort of thing, I know how long it's going to take. So I'm going to be talking about a 15-year project here, hopefully in 10 minutes, but don't be afraid to give me the hook. So what I'd like to explain to you is I'm going to try to explain the current status of our project. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the history of the project and the timeline. I'm going to put up a map to actually show you what the projects are in the layout. I will bring up a cost and summary budget so you can get an idea of you know, what it costs to do something like this. And then I'd like to go into some of the challenges that we have faced along the way with our landowners, with our excellent cooperation from DEC, and with challenges from working with VTrans. So if we could go back to that first slide. If you, and I'm sure you've all gotten off exit 18 off the interstate. If you live in Georgia or we're on the way to Fairfax or up the Lamoille, when you get off exit 18, if you were to drive straight through the barrier and not turn left or right, you would go down a 60 or 70 foot embankment down to Deer Brook. And it's a landslide area that is forming and getting deeper, and it is there because of a runoff from the highway system and from the interstate system that was installed in the 1970s. I'm just going to explain, you're getting this from the eyes of a watershed organizer. You're not getting this from the engineering firm. So I'll be telling you about the 15-year history of this project. Right now, the current status of the project is that we have had to reorganize. We got a $400,000 grant in 2019. We've had a number of delays working with the various, especially with VTrans, working with permitting, that has set us back a year. And in that time, as you know, the costs have jumped significantly. So we've had to go back to DEC and get an amended contract. We've had to reduce the project scope from working along Route 7 doing upland projects to where now we're going to be working strictly to do the gully stabilization part and to get it set up so we can hook in the upland projects. Our hope is that as we go ahead that we will be applying for more funding so we can address these upland problems as funds become available. So just last week, we went ahead and we signed a subcontractor contract with Hebert Brothers to actually do the work and start ordering supplies. With the amended contract with DEC, I haven't signed it yet, so this is a big leap of faith on the part of Friends of Northern Lake Champlain to move ahead, but we felt we could do it because of our excellent cooperation that we've gotten from DEC, and that it is imperative to move ahead on getting supplies ordered at this time. At this time, we do have full VTrans permitting to get the work done, and I've been successful in maintaining landowner approval of the project. One other big requirement for the new amended project was to revise our phosphorus loads in order to satisfy EPA, and we got that through in what I understand was a record 1-day turnaround with EPA. And I will have to tell you that we did that with the cooperation of our wonderful ANR secretary in the background helping us get this through. If you would like to go to the next slide, please, I'd like to just give you a history and look at the timeline of what's been going on here. Deer Brook is a 8.4 square mile watershed located in Georgia and Fairfax, Vermont. It flows south to Arrowhead Mountain Lake, which is part of the Lamoille River, and ultimately drains the Lake Champlain. The brook is classified as sediment impaired from its confluence with Arrowhead Mountain Lake to 2.5 miles upstream. The construction of Interstate 89 and related US Route 7 improvements in the 1970s, as well as the subsequent addition of homes and businesses near the intersection of Route 104A, have contributed to a substantial increase in stormwater and runoff discharges into the head of Deer Brook Gully. The stormwater flows combined with deteriorating culverts along Route 7 and 104A in Georgia have caused the gully to erode and deposit sediment into Deer Brook. The problem was first documented with ESPC and Stone in an NRPC commission report in 2007. That's 15 years ago. This landslide was first identified and has continued to be a problem. Stone further evaluated the site and provided conceptual concepts to reduce flows into Deer Brook Gully as a part of a 2013 stormwater master planning for the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain in the town of Georgia. It was one of 9 stormwater master plans that FNLC has done around Franklin County. In 2016, I started inquiring about going to a full design and construction grant. So 6 years ago, I wanted to go to full design and construction. I was told that no, further assessment was needed. So we applied and we got an ERP grant in 2019, and that laid out full design for gully stabilization and restoration, as well as 7 stormwater retrofit practices in the contributing watershed. The app plan, and I'll leave out this part for time. The final engineering designs that came out of that report were 4 gravel wetlands. And why don't we go to the map now? Can we go to that part?
You mean, I'm having some technical difficulties here, but I'll be bringing it up
Okay.
as soon as possible.
All right. When the map comes up, what I'll be talking about is there are 4 gravel wetland areas that are those are the upland practices that we wanted to put in place in the original grant, and then they connect to 2 catch basin risers that are in this funky intersection of Route 104A and Route 7. And I don't know how many of you have gone through that intersection, but if you can imagine, if you're coming in from 104A, it splits. And there's a side road that goes right in front of what used to be Interstate Auto. And that would be a place for a catch or one of these catch basin risers to be placed to catch some of the stormwater from the southern part that comes in. And then the other part of this is the gully restoration stabilization part. And that, what that is, it is a deep manhole system that will take the water directly down to the Deer Brook itself. And then we wanted to establish 8 log steps down in the gully. All right. No luck on the map?
Yep, it's coming up.
Okay. I've got to apologize. You can see this is my work and not my AmeriCorps members' work, which is usually technically a lot more sound than what I can do. So on the map that you see, you can see Route 7 is running on the horizontal line in the middle of the map. And then you can see where 104A comes into the intersection with Route 7. And then the larger rectangles demonstrate some of the basin areas that we wanted to put the projects in. On the lower right-hand side, that depicts the gully, and you see how tight the lines are, the distance lines. You see how tight they are, and you see how steep that is. And the gully is actively eroding behind all these private landowners. And so that's, that's the big concern, is how much sediment is going down, from those practices. All that's been done so far is at the back of Interstate Auto, we actually did construct a gravel wetland, and that is depicted as it's at the very bottom of the slide. I can't get the pointer to work. That's up to Dean, but that is one $45,000 project that is in place right now, and I have maintained excellent shareholder or property owner relations, because I've lived in town for 45 years. At Interstate Auto, I've had my vehicle service there. At Dusty Trails Realty, they used to own the filling station across the road where I had my vehicle serviced. I had a good relationship with them. The wild card in here is the landowner right on the corner is expanding that. He bought that with the idea of putting in a Dunkin' Donuts. And his idea was to take and just fill the whole gully in. That was actually part of our study, the ERP grant that we looked at. We had a cost for doing that. And in 2019, we had a cost of almost $800,000 just to fill it all in, which is what the landowner wanted to do. I've been able to hold him off for 3 years between COVID and increased costs, and working with VTrans to get this done. But he's a highly volatile individual that I've really had to work hard with to keep him online. And, that's actually the linchpin to this whole discussion, is getting that water down to the gully through his property. So that's been one of the big challenges to getting this done. So then if you look back out on Route 7, you'll see we've got like 4 or 5 graveled wetland areas or swales that would be right along Route 7. There's a real challenge there, and that the town is looking at that as they're calling that the South Village Development Project for the town of Georgia. So we're staying in touch that way, so that these practices we put in place will not be torn up and paved over as this area is renovated. So that's another area that we've had to be involved with this project going ahead. If you
So
could
Ken-
go to that, yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left for the entirety of this meeting, so
Okay.
do your
All
best.
right. Thank you for that. I already touched on the landowner challenges. Let me say that DEC has been excellent to work with. This project came about basically, when Julie Moore became A&R secretary, I remember we sat down and she said, I want a really big project, Ken. I want you to sit down and I want you to get as many people working together on a project as we can. And so I did. And I looked at this as from all those stormwater management plans we did, this is the one we hadn't gotten done yet. And I could see a chance to collaborate with VTrans, with A&R, and this money actually came from EPA. So you see all the moving parts we put together with this. So it's worked as a very good example, and it's been a good project for DEC to work with too, as we have worked our way through these permitting processes. I touched on the fact that we had to get a special easement with from the landowner for VTrans to do the maintenance that we've talked about so much today, but to do the maintenance on the gully stabilization part. That proved to be a really big challenge. The surrounding landowners have been very good to work with. I've gotten an immediate response for them, but that corner and getting VTrans to go along with this easement, and actually they're going to be doing the maintenance on this whole project. So maybe I should leave some time for questions. I cannot address the whole thing in 10 minutes, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Impressive you got to work with VTrans ineffectively, but that's impressive.
Ken, say again how the year you started, when you first began your project to now.
It was first identified in 2007.
Okay.
I mean, I would love to go through our budget with you. I can show you that the original budget was $400,000, and we broke it out, and $300,000 is supposed to go to the construction contractor to do it. We walked out and we did bids this spring. We had a half dozen companies there, and 3 weeks later we got no bids on the project because they saw what the amount in the grant and what it was. So we had to go back and do the bid process again. We found out that there was one company that there was a part of the grant they didn't want to do, but they would do another. And that's where our DEC with Danielle was my mentor through this. And she really helped lead this through. And we whittled this down to where we put this all on this real volatile landowner's property where I had the permitting in place and we could go. And I really wanted to get that part done first. So that was part of the strategy. But you see on that budget, I only had 300 for the contractor, and the bid that I got was 599. And that's just what has happened. That's life. And I'm sure everybody here knows that. But that's what's happened. And I've had to, it's been a real push. So.
Well, just as a reminder, we are at 11 o'clock. So, I mean, I'm fine 5 minutes or whatever. But
just so people know, I will be able to email out the slides that I haven't been able to share very well with all of you, but you will have all of Ken's materials. Sorry, Ken, for that technical issue. Can you just talk a little bit about where you think things will go next after this current work that's going to be funded?
Well, I'm hoping when this meeting's done, I'll have an email waiting for me with a contract to sign. And then I'm going to give the Ebert brothers, the thumbs up to start ordering materials. And our timeline is we want to start working the end of August. I had really hoped that we would be working before the school season began again, because it's at a really busy intersection. Traffic flow is going to be affected by this project. But the idea is to get this work done. I would say the month of September is when we're going to get it done. And the question is how much will we actually be able to get done down in the gully itself? And that some parts of that may have to wait till next spring because there are some plantings involved with that. And if we get too late in the season, and I mean, when we get a 2-inch rain, we have some real problems there, obviously. And we don't, and that's happened. We had a Halloween deluge 5 years ago that caused a real problem there, and that Dusty Trails Realty, they're dumping $25,000 worth of stone down that gully behind their property to keep their property from eroding down into Dearborn. So we're on a tight timetable.
Well, it's very impressive, Kent, what you've done over time. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll be having a big champagne party there in the middle of October. We'll see how it goes.
So I would suggest we move to the summary and conclusion.
Yes, no slide this time. The next meeting of the council will not be until September 22nd. That will be putting us on the regular schedule that has been adopted. Knock on wood, by that time, there will be signed contracts that will determine how what the conditions or terms for the distribution of the formula funds is. Hopefully also by that time, we will have the finalized guidance documents from DEC so that if there are questions about those would be answered. This is going to be a little bit of an extended break without a meeting in August, but we'll continue to send out more materials and also be working on some of the things that people had suggested in terms of outreach, just doing a better job making more people aware. I will just say that if anybody has contacts with local media, those are appreciated. It's challenging to get the attention of newspapers sometimes, but that is a good way, or any contacts with radio or anybody who could help make the profile of the council a little bit higher.
Dean, did you give us a date in November? Is that going to be a week before?
So yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jed. Yes, that is something that could be discussed today, although probably, but there is a conflict when we meet on the fourth Thursday when it comes to meeting in November. And Jed was good enough to identify that when we adopted the schedule. So a question before the council to resolve on September 22nd will be what would be the best backup date for meeting on the 22nd? Would it be better to just push it back 1 week and meet in the first Thursday in December or something like that, or move it up 1 week? Do people have any initial thoughts?
I guess I would push it back a week.
I'm not sure if people are ready with calendars to lock that in, but it will be something that will be on the agenda. That would be my suggestion also. So we will make sure that that is an agenda item so that people lock that in. It's an occupational hazard when meeting on the fourth Thursday, just as meeting on Mondays can sometimes be an issue with federal holidays. No table to present as has been done in some of the previous meetings.
Okay, then. How are we doing? Anyone have a motion? Make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Jed.
And second.
Kent seconds. Recognize Kent seconding that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right.
Thanks, everyone. You'll be getting more email from me, copies of documents, including the student report on co-benefits. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Dean.
you.
Thanks,
See
Jed,
ya.
Kent, Richard.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.